Jim noticed his hands trembling as he loaded the 16mm film reel into the projector in UCLA's dark screening room. What happened next left 12 professors in complete silence and made someone say, "Stop this now." June 14, 1965. UCLA Film School's Melnitz Hall. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke and the heat of the projection lamp. Morrison's previous 3 projects had been shown in class: short experimental works, poetry fragments, Venice Beach footage. But this was different. 22-year-old Morrison had put everything into this graduation project. When the film started, burned frames, screaming sounds, and images of death filled the screen. But what none of them knew was this: Morrison's father, a Navy admiral, was pressuring the dean to expel his son from this school. In the back row sat 24-year-old Ray Manzarek, a music school graduate, the only person who saw Morrison's talent. He saw genius in the chaos of that film. The film lasted 18 minutes. Normal projects were 8 minutes. When Professor James Beverly stopped the film, he turned to Morrison and said, "This will never see daylight again." Manzarek quietly took notes. Morrison's real art belonged somewhere else. 3 weeks later, on Venice Beach, he would tell him, "Let's start a band." If you're curious about the rest of this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every week we share untold stories about Jim Morrison and the Doors. Those 18 minutes in that projection room changed Jim Morrison's life forever, but he didn't know it at that moment. As Professor Beverly's words still echoed in his ears, Morrison took the reel and silently left the room. He stood in the corridor and took a deep breath. For 4 years, he had dreamed of making films at UCLA, had come to this school despite his father's pressure, and now he had received a 0 on his graduation project. But what was truly devastating were the professor's final words. The film copies would be destroyed. The images Morrison had worked on for months, the pieces of his own soul he had put into them, would be lost forever. The reel in his hand was the last copy, and he had to turn it in. That night, Morrison went to Venice Beach. He needed the sound of the ocean, the rhythm of the waves, the silence of the sand. As the sun set, he walked on the beach and pulled out the notebook from his pocket. If he couldn't make films, at least he could write. Words began to flow, about death, about darkness, about doors. He wrote, "Break on through to the other side." He didn't know then that these words would be on millions of people's lips a year later. He didn't know that UCLA's rejection was actually a liberation. The system didn't want him, but the streets would. Most of Morrison's film projects at UCLA were lost, but some witnesses could never forget those images. Years later, in an interview, Manzarek would describe Morrison's films as visual poetry. "When you watched Jim's films, you were entering his brain," he said. Those images weren't logical, weren't comprehensible, but you felt them. Death, sexuality, freedom, captivity. Everything was intertwined. The professors couldn't handle it because Jim was holding up a mirror to them, and what they saw frightened them. There's very little information about the content of the graduation project, but some UCLA archive records offer interesting details. Morrison's film apparently consisted of 3 parts. The first part showed a woman's face in close-up. She was crying, laughing, screaming, all silently. The second part was footage from after a traffic accident. The accident Morrison witnessed at age 5 that changed his life. Native American workers lying on the ground, blood, broken glass, the merciless light of the sun. The third part was a complete chaos scene, a ritual Morrison created by filming his friends on Venice Beach. Fire, dance, screams, songs. The camera was shaking, focus was drifting, images were overlapping. But the professors didn't just see technical errors. There was a danger in Morrison's film, an uncontrollable energy. UCLA was a conservative institution in 1965, and Morrison's vision transcended those walls. When Professor Beverly stopped the film, he told Morrison, "This isn't art. This is chaos." Morrison smiled. "Isn't art chaos anyway?" he replied. At that moment, Morrison's fate at UCLA was sealed. When Morrison's films were destroyed, no one could have predicted that this would one day affect music history. But that rejection freed Morrison. He no longer had to conform to academic standards, didn't have to please anyone. All he had were his words, his voice, and those endless nights on Venice Beach. That summer, Morrison went to the beach every day. Sometimes took LSD, sometimes just watched the sunset. His notebook filled up. Then he got another one, and that filled up too. Words came in bursts. Riders on the Storm, The End, When the Music's Over, all written after that UCLA rejection. But Morrison's real misfortune was his relationship with his father. Admiral George Stephen Morrison had never accepted his son being an artist. As a high-ranking officer in the Navy, he understood discipline, order, authority. Jim was the opposite: chaotic, rebellious, uncontrollable. The last serious conversation between father and son had been in 1964. George told his son, "Either you find a proper job or you're not part of this family." Morrison didn't answer. He just left the house and never returned. The film project at UCLA was a chance for Morrison to prove himself. Maybe his father would see his son's talent, maybe accept him. But when the 0 grade came, Morrison lost all hope. His father was right. The system didn't want him. Years later, even after Morrison became famous, his father rejected his son. In 1969, when a journalist asked Admiral Morrison about his son, he said, "My son is dead." Those words shattered Jim. After the Miami scandal, during the court proceedings, Morrison would often say, "My father was right. I'm a failure." The rejection at UCLA wasn't just a grade, it was the beginning of Morrison's sense of worthlessness. That feeling followed him throughout his life, in every whiskey bottle, in every stage performance, in that last bathtub in Paris. But Ray Manzarek had seen something else in Morrison. In that UCLA projection room, while everyone saw chaos, Manzarek saw genius. He had graduated from the music department and dreamed of starting his own band. Morrison's films weren't musical, but there was rhythm, there was tempo, there were emotional rises and falls. Manzarek realized this could be converted into music. After the film screening ended, he found Morrison in the corridor. "I loved your film," he said. Morrison was surprised. "Are you joking? According to everyone, it was terrible." Manzarek smiled. "Because they don't understand, but I do. You're making visual music." That conversation comforted Morrison, but it wasn't enough. When graduation ceremony came, Morrison didn't attend. He received his diploma in the mail and never spoke of UCLA again. During the summer months, he lived on Venice Beach, sometimes on friends' couches, sometimes sleeping on the beach. There was no money, no future, just notebooks full of words. At the end of July, as Morrison was walking on the beach again, he ran into Ray Manzarek. Was it coincidence, or was Manzarek looking for him? Neither knew, but that encounter would change rock history. Manzarek asked Morrison what he was doing. "I'm writing poetry," Morrison said. "Read me one," Manzarek said. Morrison hesitated, then closed his eyes and recited the poem, Moonlight Drive. Manzarek got goosebumps. This wasn't just poetry, these were song lyrics. "Jim, we should start a band," he said. Morrison hesitated at first. He didn't know music, couldn't play an instrument, was afraid of being on stage. But Manzarek was insistent. "You'll just sing, the rest is my job." Morrison agreed. That day, on Venice Beach, As the sun was setting, The Doors was born. The man UCLA rejected would change the world. But what happened to Morrison's UCLA films? Officially destroyed. But according to some rumors, a copy is hidden deep in UCLA's archives. In 2011, a film student was doing research in the basement of Melnitz Hall when he came across old film boxes. Most were from the 1960s, labels faded, reels rusted. When he opened a few boxes, he found a reel labeled J. Morrison, 1965. Excitedly, he loaded it onto the projector, but the film was too damaged. Only a few seconds could be watched. What he could see was this: a woman's face, close up, crying, then darkness. That was all. The student reported to the UCLA archive supervisor, but the reel disappeared. The official statement was uncatalogued material, probably mislabeled. But conspiracy theories had begun. Were Morrison's films really destroyed, or were they being kept as a secret UCLA was ashamed of? Another discovery happened in 2019. Morrison's friend from UCLA, Frank Lisiandro, was cleaning his garage when he found an old box. Inside were 8mm film reels. Lisiandro had worked with Morrison on film projects, and these reels were from that period. He excitedly digitized them, and what he saw was incredible. Morrison on Venice Beach in the summer of 1965, on the beach with friends. The camera showed Morrison close up, his hair short, his face young, that darkness not yet in his eyes. Morrison was reciting poetry, laughing, dancing around the fire. These images weren't from the graduation project, but they showed Morrison's cinematic vision. Lisiandro uploaded the footage to the internet and got millions of views. In the comments, everyone was asking the same thing. Where is Morrison's lost graduation project? The truth is that film is probably lost forever. UCLA's 1965 policy was clear. Student films containing inappropriate content had to be destroyed. Morrison's film wasn't just technically weak, it was also disturbing in content. Death, trauma, chaos. These weren't things UCLA would tolerate at that time. Professor Beverly's decision had been final, and the reel was probably destroyed in an incinerator in the summer of 1965. But Morrison's fans haven't given up hope. Every year, dozens of people research UCLA archives, reach out to families of old professors, search basements, garages, storage units. Maybe one day, somewhere, that 18-minute film will emerge, and we'll see Morrison's lost vision. When Morrison transitioned to music, his film education at UCLA wasn't wasted. The Doors' performances were cinematic. Morrison would set up the stage like a film set. Lighting, costume, atmosphere, all calculated. During their first concerts at Whiskey A Go-Go, Morrison would often close his eyes and sing as if shooting a film. When singing the end, he would virtually perform a screenplay, the Oedipus tragedy, the killing of the father, incestuous fantasies. Audiences would be shocked, but also mesmerized. This wasn't just music, this was a film experience, the kind of art Morrison wanted to make at UCLA but couldn't. When The Doors' first album was being recorded, Morrison directed the studio like a film set. Producer Paul Rothchild was amazed by Morrison's perfectionism. Every word, every breath, every silence was calculated. While recording Light My Fire, Morrison repeated the same line for 4 hours. "Come on, baby, light my fire." Each time with a different tone, a different emotion. Even when Rothchild said, "Jim, this is enough, it's perfect," Morrison would say, "No, one more time." That perfectionism came from UCLA. Film professors had rejected Morrison's work because it was insufficient. Morrison would never be insufficient again. Every song had to be a masterpiece. Every performance had to be unforgettable. But that perfectionism consumed Morrison. In 1967, while recording the Strange Days album, Morrison, increased his alcohol consumption. He would come to the studio late, sometimes drunk, sometimes so tired he would sing leaning against the microphone. Band members were worried, but Morrison would say, "Don't worry, I'm in control." He wasn't in control. Every day, one whiskey bottle, then two many to count. Alcohol initially boosted his creativity, then destroyed it. At the Miami concert in 1969, Morrison completely lost control on stage. He was drunk, forgetting lyrics, insulting the crowd. Some claimed Morrison performed naked. Court proceedings began, and Morrison's career collapsed. Morrison's rejection at UCLA wasn't just a grade, it was a lost path. If professors had supported Morrison's vision, if his films had been preserved, Morrison might have become one of history's greatest filmmakers. The images in his head turned into songs, but what if they had remained as films? Stanley Kubrick, David Lynch, Terrence Malick, they were all Morrison's contemporaries at UCLA. They all made experimental, disturbing, boundary-pushing films, and the system accepted them. What was Morrison's difference? Maybe he was too ahead of his time, maybe too uncontrolled, maybe just unlucky. In 2021, UCLA held an event. Lost Voices, Rejected Artists of the 1960s. A panel was held about Morrison's films. Manzarek was already dead, but the other members of the Doors, John Densmore and Robbie Krieger, attended. In his speech, Densmore said, "Jim's greatest pain was his father's rejection, but UCLA's rejection also devastated him. I wish I could have seen those films. Maybe then I would have understood Jim better." Krieger added, "Jim's music was already cinematic. Every song was a film. UCLA lost him, but the world gained. Or maybe the world lost too, because Jim was never truly happy." Morrison died in Paris in 1971, at age 27. The official cause of death was heart attack, but no autopsy was performed. Some said alcohol, some said drugs, some said suicide. The truth is unknown. But what is known is this. During Morrison's last days in Paris, he was writing poetry, dreaming of making films. He told friends, "I'm going to quit music, return to cinema." UCLA had rejected him in 1965, but Morrison still carried that dream. He had visited a film studio in Paris, examined equipment, written screenplays, but it was too late. His body was finished, his mind was tired, his spirit was broken. On the morning of July 3rd, 1971, Pamela Corson found Morrison dead in the bathtub. He had a whiskey bottle in his hand, a smile on his face. Morrison's UCLA films are lost, but his legacy lives on. Every year, thousands of film students hear Morrison's story and are inspired. That rejection story is now legend. If the system rejects you, create your own path. Morrison did that and went down in history. But are those films really gone? Maybe deep in UCLA's depths, on a dusty shelf, in a forgotten box, that 18-minute reel is still there. Maybe one day, a student will find it, digitize it, and show it to the world. Then we'll see Morrison's vision, raw, disturbing, perfect. Or maybe those films needed to be lost. Maybe Morrison's true art was music, and UCLA's rejection directed him to the right path. Break on through, Riders on the Storm. The End. These songs are more powerful than any film. They are Morrison's true masterpieces. But a corner of our hearts will always wonder, what was in that film shown in that UCLA projection room? Those images that shocked the professors, impressed Manzarek, where Morrison put himself out there. What were they like? Maybe the answer is lost forever. Maybe that's Morrison's final mystery.